Exactly.
Okay, so we've got the impact on people's lives, the whole philosophical debate, the practical challenges. Is there anything else we need to consider?
Well, there's also this question of like fairness isn't there? How do we decide who is most vulnerable and deserving of extra support? Where do we draw the line?
That is a really tough one.
It is. It is because, vulnerability, it's not always obvious. It's not always something you can just like see on the surface.
Right, it's nuanced.
It is. It is. And I think it forces us to really examine our values as a society, like how much responsibility do we feel for one another? How much are we willing to do to help those who are struggling?
Those are big questions.
They are. They are. And there are no easy answers. And I don't think there's one right answer either.
So it's not just an economic debate or a political debate, it's a moral debate too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's a debate that affects all of us, whether we realize it or not.
I think that's what's really hit home for me during this deep dive. It's like, this isn't just something for politicians to argue about in Parliament. It's something that has real-world consequences for real people. And those are our friends, our neighbors, our family members.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's important for us as citizens to be aware of what's going on, to stay informed, to engage in these conversations, even if they're uncomfortable.
It can feel overwhelming, though, can't it?
It can, but even small actions can make a difference, right? Like reading articles, talking to your friends and family about these issues, contacting your MP, making your voice heard.
Yeah, it's about being an active participant in shaping the kind of society we want to live in.
Exactly, exactly. And the more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to do that.
Well, I have to say, this whole deep dive has really opened my eyes to just how complex this issue is. I feel like we've uncovered more questions than answers.
I think that's often the case with these kinds of big societal issues, isn't it? And it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right, sometimes asking the right questions is more important than having all the answers.
Absolutely, because those questions, they can lead to more nuanced and thoughtful solutions, right?
Okay, so we've laid out the arguments, explored the context, touched on some of the ethical dilemmas. Where do we go from here? What's the takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that this debate is far from over, There's no clear resolution in sight, and, it's going to continue to evolve and change as the situation unfolds.
So we're all kind of along for the ride, in a way.
In a way, yes, but, we're not just passive passengers. We
Yeah.
can each play a role in shaping the outcome by staying informed, engaging in these conversations, and advocating for the kind of world we want to see.
So it's about staying engaged, even when it feels, complicated and messy and maybe even a bit hopeless at times.
Exactly, exactly.
Right.
Because ultimately, this is about people's lives and, it's worth fighting for.
It's amazing, isn't it? We started talking about changes to disability benefits, and somehow we've ended up having this huge conversation about the entire UK economy and what it means to be vulnerable in the world today.
Yeah, I think that just shows how connected all these things are, right? You can't really talk about welfare reform without also talking about the economy, the job market, even just basic attitudes towards people who are struggling.
It's like we've been trying to untangle this giant knot, and every time you pull on one string, it just tightens another one somewhere else.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. I think it shows how we need to look at this whole thing, this whole issue, in a more holistic way, right? We can't just focus on one tiny piece of the puzzle without thinking about how it connects to everything else.
And I think that's one of the most important things we've learned from this whole deep dive, right?
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in the political arguments, the slogans, but the reality is so much more complicated.
Oh, absolutely. We have to resist that urge to oversimplify things. We need to be comfortable with the messiness, the gray areas, the fact that there are lots of different perspectives out there.
And that means being more informed, more engaged, even more willing to listen to people who might have completely different experiences than our own.
Right. It's not about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions and being open to learning from other people.
Well, speaking of questions, there's one that I've been thinking about this whole time, through this entire deep dive. How do you balance fiscal responsibility with compassion? Can you even do both?
That's the big one, isn't it? And I honestly don't think there's a simple answer. It's like this constant balancing act, and what works in one situation might not work in another.
So it's not about finding this magic formula that solves everything. It's more about having this ongoing conversation
Right.
about our values, our priorities, and how we build a society that takes care of everyone.
And that conversation needs to involve everyone. Policymakers, economists, social workers, people with disabilities, everyday citizens, we all have a stake in this.
Because ultimately, this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about people's lives.
Exactly, exactly. And it's about what kind of society we want to live in, one that values fairness, dignity, compassion, all those things.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground today, and I hope our listeners are walking away with a better understanding of this really complex issue.
Me too, me too. And, even if we didn't answer all the questions, hopefully we've raised some new ones, given people something to think about.
As the UK grapples with all these challenges, what role do you want to play? How do you want to be a part of shaping the future of, welfare and support for those in need? It's a question we should all be asking ourselves, and one that we'll be wrestling with for a long time to come. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and keep those conversations going, everyone.